webinar. This is the first of quite a few webinars we've got coming over the next few weeks. So keep an eye out on the emailer and keep an eye out on LinkedIn to see what's coming up. We've got a real treat today. We've got Mark Shepherd, who's got 30 years experience in 25 different countries. He's going to be talking to us about DMAs and about pressure drops and the great advantages and benefits that they can be for us. So Mark, you've got a real international audience looking at all the people we've got and from where they are. So there's obviously much interest in this. So we're going to hand it over to you, Mr. Shepherd. You've got 45 minutes and then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session.
Okay. Michael, do you want to mention maybe the poll thing? Because that just to everyone's briefed. Okay,
yeah. So coming up throughout this, I'm going to be Mark Shepherd's gopher, and I've got a few polls that he's created. They're on slido.com. When we get to them, we'll be back and forth sharing screens. You need to go to slido.com, and there'll be a little number for you to put in, and Mark's going to ask you to answer a few questions for us. But that'll be later on at some point. I don't know where it comes, Mark. You tell me. But
yeah, I'll tell you when this. Yeah, there's three little spots along the way. But if everyone could maybe just bear with us, we are trying out some new technology. Mark and I had fun this morning trying to sort this out. So forgive us if it takes a bit longer. But yeah, we're going to try to play with something new. So Michael, are we good to go?
Feel free to go ahead, Mark. We're ready to go.
Okay. Right. So here's my opening slide. We're going to be talking about the power of zero pressure tests and some recent case studies we've done. We're going to take a little bit more past zero pressure tests and DMAs. I kind of put this up as my opening slide as, what we do is leakage. You really must have the most difficult job in the world finding pictures that kind of cover what we do. So here's a fantastic picture of a zero pressure test underway. And as you can see, there's nothing happening, and so it's quite hard to explain to the public or anyone for that matter, kind of about pictures, what we do. But I'll try my best for the presentation. So what we'll be going through, pretty much 7 things. We'll look at DMAs themselves. We'll look at some operational scenarios. We'll look at how we determine discreteness of DMAs. And then we'll start going a little bit further. We'll start looking at leakage paths, some pressure leakage relationships, some tools we have available, and then we'll do some case studies in terms of how we've got everything pulled together and got some results for different water utilities. So that's the kind of agenda that we'll be following. So before then, though, okay, I'm going to take you through a little walk through history. Alan, you're on board. Hopefully you'll enjoy this one. Okay, so let's just take a walk through where things started. So what I could see in 1994, we came up with 2 concepts. We had the concept of FAVAD, which is fixing variable area discharge, and BABE kind of came around in about 94. Okay, next development we had was in 1997, that we started looking at night flow component analysis. Average zone pressure and night day factors, or hour day factors, came around in around about then. 1999, we came up with the IWA Blue Pages, the little document which kind of set out our best practice for water balance and terminology there. In 2000, we came up with economic intervention policies and rated rise of unreported leakage. That's a very complicated icon there because doing the economic level of leakage was not easy. It was a bit of a donkey. 2005, we simplified things a little bit. So we had economic leakage levels with and without pressure management. 2012, next development, we had pressure burst frequency relationships. 2014, really good document that was put out by Core Mercs for the EU. So we have the EU reference document for good practices on leakage management. 2017, we came up with N1 varying with pressure, and that will be quite a strong points of the webinar today. And in 2020, there's a couple of people on the call here who decided to say, right, let's look at this URL again, and let's see if we can refine it somewhat under certain conditions. That took place about 3 years ago. But all of those steps there, I traced back in history, and in 1980 was the first mention I could find of a DMA that was kind of published. So I cannot remember what UK WAA stands for, UK Water, something like I can't remember, but they're the report 26, leakage control policy and practice, and there was the first thing I could find on about a district metered area. So from 1980 to kind of where we are today, that's 44 years later, and we're still talking about DMAs. So let's start with the building blocks. What are these DMAs? Just a few definitions. So I've attributed the definition to the source as we go along here. So here's the first one: small zones between 500 and 3,000 households within a zone. Each DMA is discrete, which basically means it's either watertight or monitored, with a defined and permanent boundary, with flows into and out of being monitored by a flow meter.
No.
Yeah. Second one, going back to 1980, it's a discrete area of the distribution system created by the closure of valves or complete disconnection of pipework, through which quantities of water entering and leaving are metered. And then we analyze those flows to quantify the level of leakage. And then that helps us as practitioners determine kind of where leakage is and what we can do to sort it out. Next one, let's jump across the pond with the American M36 manual. There, DMA is described as being a small zone, typically between 1,000 and 3,000 connections, with measured supply input flow of sufficiently small volume that individual leakage events can be quantified. Yeah, so that's their definition. And the last one, back across the pond to the UK, with UKWA, definition of a DMA. It's an area which is specifically defined by the closure of valves, and in which the quantities of water entering and leaving the district are metered. So there's four definitions of a district metered area for you. In terms of why we have DMAs, so again, I'm going to go back to, in this case, just three reasons. And again, the reference is there as well. So AWWA, the purpose of a DMA, they've said they're basically the primary concept and advantage is to isolate and monitor a small area, again of sufficient scale, so that flows can be analyzed to distinguish components of normal consumption from leakage rates. Okay. Another one, if we go down to, you must please excuse me if there's a later version. I only had a draft version of the guidance notes from the specialist group. But the purpose of a DMA there is to regularly quantify the leakage level so that leakage location activity is always directed to the worst parts of the network. And division or use of DMAs facilitates creation of a permanent pressure control system, which enables pressure reduction, reduce the level of background leakage, burst flow rates, and burst frequency. And then last one from UKWA over here. Basically, the purpose of a DMA is a means by which the night flows can be regularly monitored, enabling the presence of reported bursts and leakage, and to manage the pressure in each district so that the network is operated at an optimum level of pressure. So if you look, there seems to be a common theme or a common description of some sorts, internationally. It's the definition of a DMA and what we use them for, is pretty much the backbone of what we do. And there seems to be, kind of largely consensus on what they are and what we meant to do with them. So here's just what it might look like. here's just an area for a water company. There's their DMA layout as an example. I'm now going to go through some different configurations because how we deal with the DMA really depends on how it's configured in the first place. So what we could have, let's start with the easy one, okay? We could have a DMA that has one inlet and no outlet. So that's the easiest situation that we can get for a DMA. But we can also get a DMA that has one inlet and that has multiple outlets. Okay? We can have a single inlet DMA with a single outlet, another DMA. We could have multiple inlets into a DMA with a single outlet. Okay? We could have a multiple inlets to a DMA with no outlet. And then the last one we got here is you could have a DMA, but nested inside a DMA, we might have these things called PMAs or pressure managed areas. So a lot of people use the terms interchangeably, DMA and PMA. They are not the same. Okay, they're different. But then if you get used to the acronyms here, a DMA can be, a PMA can be a DMA on its own. And so, but just be aware that there's two different things. So PMA could be a DMA, okay, but often you'll find some DMAs will contain a number of different pressure managed areas inside them. So those are the kind of the configurations that you'll find kind of out in the field when you start working with them. And remember, if you're working with a DMA and you want to know what's happening, you're looking at the net kind of outcome of what's happening. So if you have anything leaving, obviously you need to subtract it from what's coming in to understand what's happening inside the DMA that you're studying. So that's why these configurations become quite important, because you need to understand what the measurements are telling you and to make sure that you use the right measurements if you're carrying out any type of analysis. Right, so in terms of some operational scenarios, I've tried to put my graphic skills to the best I can. So there's kind of a typical gravity supplied area with some profiles into a zone. So we have the blue line, which is just the amount of water going into point on. So we have how much water is coming into a DMA. We have the average zone pressure in the DMA, and we will have our leakage. Okay, so I'll come back to the relationships between these profiles later on. But now I've tried to say, right, well, let's kind of show these DMAs as kind of how they work. So here's a DMA. In this case, it's a water bottle. Okay, and then if it's operating discretely, you'll find that whatever happens inside this little DMA with pressure, okay, it's not affecting any of the bottles next to it. Okay, so there's no connections between the two here. So this here moving up and down represents the day-by-day version here. And you'll see whatever happens in here, it's not affected by the two bottles or the two DMAs on the other side. All right. But what happens if these are interconnected? So if you've got two DMAs that are linked, then basically conservation of energy really is the water will flow to attempt to achieve hydraulic equilibrium. So water will flow between the two DMAs to try to get some level of balance. So it's a kind of simple law, and that's what will happen. So if we've got flow going from an adjacent DMA so we have flow from a DMA that has a slightly higher pressure, so just take this as head of water, going into a DMA with a slightly lower pressure, okay, the flow is going to go from the higher pressure to the lower pressure. Yeah. On the other side, if you got that way, that would mean that in this case, this means that water will leave the DMA, okay? So we'll come back to that, but the water will leave, and if the zone is reached into an area of higher pressure, then you're going to have water coming into your DMA. So your water will either leave or come into a DMA, depending on how it's reached or how it's linked between the two. Okay. But water will always flow from high pressure to low pressure. It will always try to reach some form of hydraulic equilibrium. if we don't understand it or we don't get that right, we don't pick it up, then really all our leakage calculations that we'd be doing in the DMA are pretty much wrong. Because we could be looking at the DMA supplying a far larger area than we thought it was. So we could be looking at different incorrect numbers, because we assume when we analyze what's happening in the DMA, our assumption, or we try to get to a point. So Michael, has my PowerPoint disappeared?
I can still see it.
Oh, okay, it disappeared from my screen. Okay. Yeah, so we always assume that the DMA is unique. It's defined as discrete. We know the parameters, we know the variables, so we can analyze it properly. If it's breached or connected to another DMA, then all those calculations and analyses are pretty much worthless. So the consequences of some of dealing with breached DMAs. So in this case, I have a DMA. Our DMA is linked to an adjacent DMA. We have a higher pressure than the adjacent one. Okay, so if water is leaving our DMA, then any flow analysis we take out is not just for our DMA, but includes what's happening in the adjacent one as well. So that would be what we would see. As a result of that, we may calculate leakage as being much higher than what it actually is, because we're looking at essentially 2 zones worth of leakage. If we use that, we might plan incorrectly. So, we'll be doing planning based on incorrect figures. And then really pressure management won't work inside our DMA, as, the pressure will try to get to, a critical point target normally. It'll never get there because water's kind of siphoning out into another area. So you might find that the PRV, for example, might even sit fully open in some cases, and not even be reducing pressure at all. So that would completely negate, any kind of leakage reduction through pressure management. So that's one of the consequences if we have water leaving our DMA into another one. And then obviously, if you're doing a DMA balance, won't balance. If we have it the other way around and we have water coming into our DMA, okay, then the flow analysis that we're looking at would exclude the area that's supplied by the adjacent DMA, and we wouldn't know how big that is. And it might be some of the zone, it might be all of the zone. We don't actually know. Okay, so the flow analysis would again be incorrect because we don't know how much of our DMA we're feeding. Okay. If that is the case, then leakage calculations will come out lower. So the leakage will be lower than what's actually happening. Again, you're going to plan on incorrect figures, and then pressure management inside our DMA won't work because the valve might be working against the pressure higher than the set point. So in worst case scenarios, if you have a zone breach, if we're doing pressure management inside our DMA, the PRV itself will hydraulically close at certain times of the day. So it kind of renders pressure reduction kind of pretty much redundant. It won't work at all. And again, the balance won't balance. So let's look at some ways of confirming discreteness of a DMA. So the first one that we'll look at is we basically go and look at the boundary valves. What defines a DMA? We'll do some valve sounding. So what that typically involves is people don't do the first part, but you normally exercise the valve. So you'd open and close it first and then listen to the valve. If it's slightly cracked, you'll hear water passing through pretty much the same as a leak. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to look at pressures cross boundary. So if you have a closed valve that defines the DMA, you could take pressures inside the DMA and outside the DMA. Obviously assuming that they're working under different pressure conditions. And as long as there is a pressure difference across a valve, you could probably safely assume that that valve is closed. So you could do a cross boundary check. You could do something that's called a partial zero pressure test. So that's to avoid the last one. So I'm going here in kind of order of the most simple to the most complex. So partial zero pressure tests would mean that we would reduce the pressure inside the DMA, okay? But we make sure that the pipes always remain full, okay? And normally we would make sure that we don't compromise a customer's level of service. So, if your minimum level of service to a customer is 20 meters, then basically we would drop the pressure down to effectively 20 meters at the critical point and no further. And that is a way of looking at determining discreteness. And the most extreme way, so there we go. So just a quick picture, how we drop the pressure down, but still maintain pressure at a critical point. The most extreme way of confirming it is to do a complete full zero pressure test. And that basically means draining all the water from the DMA and make sure nothing's coming in at all. So you would normally open a hydrant, drain the entire DMA, and as long as everything's empty and there's nothing happening in terms of measurements, then rest assured that the DMA is pretty much discrete and nothing's going to happen there. So just to put it into some pictures, so there's my kind of fake DMA. So the first way to look at it again, cross-boundary valve acoustic checks. You can look at sound across the valve. You can do your manual closure. So you can physically kind of open and close the valves, or you can do this cross-boundary pressure check. So that's the easiest ways. A partial zero pressure test, and that's there. I'm going to put these up here. Is you have a critical point, and you just pick a pressure point inside the zone. You would induce a pressure drop at the inlet, okay? And you would assume that the pressure that's recorded either at your monitoring point here or the critical point, if it's not reached, the pressure at those 2 points will drop as well, okay? And they'll kind of pretty much follow the induced pressure drop, okay? If it's not reached again and you're monitoring what's happening outside your own DMA, pressure outside the DMA shouldn't change. It won't respond to an induced drop in your DMA. Yeah. If the zone is breached, then what you will find in terms of the pressure profiles at either at your measuring point is pressure could initially drop and then recover and go higher. And that means water's coming in to your zone, or it could start dropping and then further drop away because your zone is supplying somewhere else. Okay? And then in your adjacent DMAs, if you are monitoring pressure, the pressure might go up or it might go down in the adjacent DMA because of your induced pressure drop. Okay? So that's a partial drop, okay? But it means we take it down to a certain level and just to keep our little critical point happy and to keep all our pipes full. We then have a full zero pressure test, okay, which is it was long regarded as a standard, but it's an absolute nightmare from an operational perspective. Here's what happens for a zero pressure test: is you would effectively close off the supply to the DMA completely. You'd shut it off. There's no more water coming in. You'd then find a hydrant at the low point. You'd open it up and you'd waste a whole lot of water onto the streets. And then you'd watch what happens with your pressures. If the zone's not breached, then wherever you're measuring pressure, the pressure will drop down to zero. And there shouldn't be any change on any adjacent zone. If it is breached, you're going to find the same thing, that even though you shut this off, water will always kind of come into the DMA, which means the pressure is going to start dropping and then recover again because there's water coming in from somewhere else. Okay? Even though you got lots of water being wasted along here. And then you'll pick it up from an adjacent zone where the pressure will start dropping because it's feeding into your DMA. Okay, so that's the kind of the four tests. So Michael, at this point, this is the first poll that we need to run. So
okay, so we're going to see if this works.
We're going to see if this works now. So I don't know if you can take
So
control back.
you're going to have to enable me. You need to go down to share screen, Mark, and you're going to enable me to be able to share screen.
Okay. Okay, where do I do that for you? Sorry. Do you
Okay,
not
so
take
either,
control
or
back
maybe
now?
maybe go on the participants list and pick me as the IWA at the top.
Okay.
Okay, oh, wait a minute, I may be able to do it by doing this. Okay.
There we go.
So, there we go. Right, so I'm going to share screen now, and we've got a question for you. So what you need to do, you need to go onto slido.com, or you can get your phone up and just use that QR code, and there's going to be a question. Or as you put in that slide, or when you go to slido.com, there'll be a number that it wants you to put in. That's the number you see down at the bottom there. So 7325847. And so Mark's given us a question: which would be the best method of determining DMA discreteness for you? Okay, so we've got an answer in there. Someone's gone for a partial zero pressure test.
Hey, Michael, at least it's working.
Yeah, at least it's working. So good. No, actually. Okay, so we've got a response on all of them. We'll leave this going for another 30 seconds. At the minute, there seems to be a clear winner.
Yeah.
Still responses coming in.
I think maybe, Michael, another 30 seconds just to make sure people might be...
Absolutely, that's fine. We've had 27 responses. So if you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see how many responses we've got. So if you've got your smartphone, you can just go on to the QR code or at slido.com and put that number in. Okay, I think we'll keep it there. So,
yeah.
Mark, there's your responses. 57% go for the full zero pressure test, and what I need to do is make you the host again.
Yeah. So quite interesting results actually. I think all the people who answered for the first one. So Michael, you need to give me.
Yes, you are again now.
Okay. So quite interesting. I can probably tell that all the people who answered the first question are definitely not water utility companies, because that would be the kind of the least popular one, because that could, and when you get water quality issues, you could get kind of pressure transient issues if you start refilling the lines. There's a whole lot of things that can go wrong. So it's not the most popular answer. I'm very surprised, but I can tell that probably the people who answered that were consultants and not water companies. But anyway, just nice to see kind of what people think about these things. Right. So if we're going to do these sign tests, okay, then just to determine discreteness. So let's see if we can do some more with it. Okay. So we could also use a partial zero pressure test to carry out a pressure step test that gives us a lot of information about what's happening inside DMA. Yeah. So it's not working. Okay. So if we did the step test, we could start looking at fixed and variable area leakage. Okay, so we can use information from that to get basically leakage behavior. Okay, we could calculate and map the N1 factor, which I'll get back to you just now. If you aren't familiar with it, I'll come to it just now, but that is basically, it defines the relationship between pressure and leakage. Well, there we go, next one. And that N1 factor is really used to model the impact of pressure management on leakage flow rates. Okay, so to determine the relationship, we need to use the average zone pressure inside the DMA. So you'll notice for the discreteness test, I just put pressure arbitrarily inside inside the DMA. If we're going to use the test for more information, then we need to use the average zone pressure inside the DMA. And that's critical. It's got to be representative of what's happening in the zone. We can't use a proxy, off a critical point or from some other point in the network. We need to calculate it correctly, and then take the pressure at that point. Okay, and that's quite key for the calculations. Yeah, we can look at historical measurements from what's been going into the DMA. So most water companies have kind of flow and pressure measurements for most of the DMAs. We can look at it. So we just say, right, if we were going to do a test, what normally happens is we would look at dropping the pressure in the early hours of a Sunday morning, when consumption is absolute lowest, but that's typically in kind of Europe or the US. But again, this might change in other countries. So if you're working in the Arab countries, obviously your weekends a day earlier, and there may be some other conditions that local conditions that might affect it. But then typically we try to do a step test on the early hours of a Sunday morning, and then again the pressure drop. We're looking at between basically a couple of hours, and not too short. But we need something that gives us a bit of stability, that we can analyze the data correctly. And the pressure drop, if any of you are aware of the history of doing N1 tests, it used to be a multi-step kind of pressure drop. So we used to drop the pressure down in a couple of steps and then recover in a couple of steps. We found that that's no longer necessary. So we can do a single drop, so just one step only. And the extent of the drop really, as long as we don't go below the minimum level of service at the critical point of supply, then the pressure drop really can be anything up to that. So we've got a bit of leeway, hopefully, in terms of doing a pressure drop itself. So here's this kind of moving now this partial zero pressure test to the N1 step test. Okay, so you'll see now we're now monitoring pressure at the average zone point. So we've now identified this point, and that's where we need to monitor pressure. Okay? So we're going to take the elements of a partial test, okay, and we're going to induce a pressure drop into the DMA for a certain amount of time. So that pressure drop that takes place, okay, we'll agree on what the pressure drop is, and then assuming it's discrete, okay, critical point of supply, we will also see the pressure drop roughly the same profile as the inlet. Okay, we want to stay above our minimum level of service. And at the average zone pressure point, we should also see the pressure drop, again tracking what we've done at the inlet. Okay. We'll be measuring the flow at the same inlet point. So we want to know how much water is going into the DMA, and the flow should drop with a pressure drop. So again, we would expect the flow profile going into the DMA to pretty much mirror the pressure profile. And then what we're after there is, once we've done this small pressure drop, held it for a bit, recovered back to normal, we are after this little window here of information that's got our pressure drop. So this would be our kind of a baseline pressure. We would drop it down to a new pressure and then recover. And then we'd have our baseline leakage or flow rate. It'll drop down and then come back up and recover. So that there is what we want out of effectively a partial zero pressure test. We've now changed it into another test, which is going to give us a lot of information about leakage. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we're after for that. Okay, Michael, at this point, it's poll number 2. So if you can put poll
okay,
number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do this. Okay, so what we're going to do now, got to share my screen. And then, so we're back into Slido. Okay, so that was our first question. Here comes our second question. It's a lot easier. It's just a yes or no. So the question is, could an N1 test uncover a potential zone breach? So yes or no. Again, just like we did earlier. I think this one is a lot more straightforward. We've got a 20-to-1 ratio at the moment in favour that it could. We'll give it a few more seconds. The no's are coming up now.
Okay, the no's are recovering a bit.
Yep, it's a bit of a comeback. I'm not sure it's going to make it all the way. Okay, so let's leave it there. Okay, so we've had 26 responses. We've got 88% say yes, 12% say no, and you're going back to check your. How do I do this? I need to give you that's a mark. And
back to me.
You can have the screen back.
Okay. Right. So let's go back to where we were. Right, so let's move on now. So let's look at FAVAD. So this came back to the 1700s now. So there's a scientist called Daniel Bernoulli. That's his LinkedIn profile from 1738. So happy guy. He made a post on LinkedIn and he says, fantastic, I've discovered how pressure can affect leak flow rate. So this is Bernoulli's equation, or equation for flow through a fixed orifice. You might all be familiar with this, but this was Mr. Bernoulli. It kind of figured out this formula. So here we have our flow, it's basically through a fixed orifice. Yeah, so there he is, quite happy with himself. He made this discovery and now he's the dapper scientist and he's updated his profile pic the following year. Yeah. But then, quite a few years later, a gentleman named John May came along and he said, well, what happened if the orifice changes size? So even though he was long gone, Mr. Bernoulli is a little bit embarrassed now. So John May was kind of the kind of the pillar of kind of research and coming up with the concept of FAVAD, which is this fixed and very discharge. So he was the guy who kind of set the scene for us. He did most of the development of our equations. So he kind of challenged kind of Professor Bernoulli back in the day, and we used what he's did. We carried on through all our calculations. So fixed and variable area leakage pass, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to go through here. You should hopefully all be aware of this. So fixed area leakage, this is effectively Bernoulli's original equation, where we have a leak flow rate varies with basically a factor to the power of 0.5, which is the square root. So if you just think back to the previous slide where we had if the formula included a square root, and that's a fixed area leakage. It includes ring cracks, corrosion holes, and that's the least sensitive to changes in pressure. So here's our kind of our 0.5 or our square root relationship with leak flow rate and pressure. Variable area leakage basically means that the more pressure you put in the pipe, the leak hole size is going to change. It will change laterally, it will change longitudinally, and that will vary with pressure to a power of 1.5. Okay, and that affects leak flows and unavoidable background leakage, and this is the most sensitive to changes in pressure. So here's our 1.5 exponent relationship with pressure and leak flow rate. So we don't have only one of those leakages taking place inside a DMO. We have two happening the whole time. Okay, so we have an element of variable, an element of fixed. We might have more variable than fixed. But if you look at the behavior of the curves are different, and we add them together to get our total leakage. So if you're analyzing leakage and you want to know you want to drop your leakage down, ideally you'd like to know how much is variable and how much is fixed. And if your variable area leakage, that's the one that responds to pressure management, and your fixed area, that's the one that you traditionally use active leakage control to go and find this. If you find your variable area leakage is higher than fixed area leakage, well, you're going to concentrate on pressure management. If it's the other way around, okay, and you have dominant fixed area leakage, you're probably going to get a better return going out and looking for leaks and repairing them. So even though we have these two different paths or leakage relationships, they're simultaneously happening in the DMA. Okay, and one of the things we can do with the N1 test we just showed you is you can actually split that out, and you can figure out of your total leakage how much is fixed area and how much is variable area. So just to understand the pressure and leakage relationship, it's quite handy to explain sometimes how we've got the same hydraulic principle working against each other at the same time. Well, that we won't make sense at the moment. But if you've got flow going into a DMA, okay, that flow, okay, you can see people are now asking for more and more water. Okay, because of that, my pressure is dropping. Okay, so here I have flow driving a pressure change. Okay, so whenever my flow kind of goes up, my pressure is going to go down. Okay, so that's now the pressure drop that's induced by a demand, okay, by somebody calling for water. All right, we have exactly the same principle now working in reverse when it comes to the pressure profile and leakage. Okay, so if we look at our night line, which is made up of all these things over here. Okay, so under the night line, we've got reported leakage, unreported leakage, we've got night use, we've got customer side leakage, and we've got our unavoidable and background, all sitting under that line over here. Okay, so there's my leakage flow rate, because now in the leaks, okay, that's now affected by the pressure profile. So we have demand inducing a pressure profile, and we have a pressure profile inducing a leakage profile. Exactly the same principle, okay, but kind of working in reverse. And that's what's happening the whole time through a DMA. This constant cycle, we've got flow drawing to affect pressure, and that pressure is affecting leakage. And that's the relationship that we want. We want this green line relationship when it comes to the leakage calculations. So in terms of the curves, where we start looking at leak flow rate and pressure, we have a ratio of pressures and a ratio of leakage numbers. These are all your different curves, your fixed and variable. Okay, but let's make it really simple. And we can look at effectively a simultaneous equation here. So if we have an initial pressure, we'll have a leak flow rate at that pressure. If we then take it to a new pressure, we're going to have a new leak flow rate because of the previous slide. Okay, so we've got pressure and leakage now linked. Okay, so that would be my formula. I would cancel out the area here. So we have a ratio of leakage and pressure behaving to an exponent, which we've just tested for. Or very more simply, our new leakage level is equal to our old leakage level multiplied by the pressure change to the power of N1. And I think I got this the wrong way around. Anyway, so as long as we know what's happening with the N1, okay, and we know what our measurements are, we can very accurately calculate what's happening with leakage and do some predictions for the way forward. So our N1 factor, it's got two hard bounds. Okay, it can't drop below 0.5, can't go above 1.5, but I'll come back to that just now. I'm just going to put this up quickly. So just to kind of make it more kind of hands-on for a while, if we're looking at the N1 kind of drifting down towards 0.5, you'll tend to be dealing more with rigid pipes in your network, and your intervention will probably be closer, it'll probably tend towards active leakage control. If you start going the other way and your N1 factors kind of bumping around up near the 1.5, you would tend to have more flexible pipes in your network, and those are the network that would respond better to pressure management. And if you have mixed pipe materials, we're very inventive as engineers, we'll just take the average of 1. So if we go back to this relationship now, which is what I showed in the previous slide, here we have leakage levels, old and new, pressure levels, old and new, and we have this number which sits somewhere inside this range. If we have a factor of 1, so this number here is 1, we have a linear relationship. Okay, so that basically means that we'll have a directly proportional relationship here. The leak will be directly proportional to pressure. Okay? So what that means is if we drop the pressure by 10% in a zone, we'll get a 10% drop in leakage. Okay, that's not a strictly linear relationship. If we start heading down towards 0.5, towards a square root relationship, 10% drop in pressure will give us a 5 and some change % drop in leakage. Go up the other end. If I do a 10% drop in pressure and my N1's heading up towards 1.5, best we can get 10% drop in pressure will give us a 17% drop in leakage. Right, so that's kind of an idea, kind of a rule of thumb that you can use if you're looking at kind of a quick case for leakage reduction. So we've got this number for the N1, and it's not new. People have been doing it for a while. Okay, so we get this number, and we've always assumed that the number is fixed. So whatever number we get from the test, that's the number. We're going to use it for all our calculations. Let's get it done and dusted and move on. There was a 2017 paper where I think some of the this was both an academic and a practitioner approach to say, well, is that actually true? Does it kind of hydraulically hold that we have this fixed number? So if we assume that this is fixed, then what we're also assuming is that the percentage of fixed and variable area leakage doesn't change with pressure, which is counterintuitive because we know it should. Okay, so if we use a fixed N1, okay, it's going to it will over predict your N1 number. Okay, it's going to be different at lower pressures and the same on the other side. So this is one of the reasons that we found water companies who've planned pressure management or pressure reduction intervention, they've done their modeling and they said, right, we're going to do our implementation plan or your rollout plan. We're going to put PRVs here, 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 and here. We expect to get X%, or X cubic meters of leakage volume reduction. Okay, and you don't get it. Okay, that's one of the reasons why you don't get it, because this number here doesn't remain the same. So if you're dropping pressure, this number is going to start changing. Okay, so if we just explain it to you, there's our fixed number. Okay, if we're changing pressure and we know that we have FAVAD, okay, then as the pressure changes, our N1 number is going to change. And so the moment we start dropping pressure, then this N1 value is going to change. And we can map this using FAVAD. We know what this relationship will be. Okay. And then what will happen now is your predictions, if you're going to say, I'm going to drop the pressure from 40 down to whatever, yeah, you might predict a certain kind of leakage volume recovery. You won't get it. You will have overestimated it. Yeah. On the other side, exactly the same thing. This curve we can carry on, can still be mapped. Okay, we know what it is using FAVAD. And then the same thing would work if you're gonna if your pressure rises. Okay, and again you're gonna underestimate your predictions. So the key takeaway here is if you do an N1 test and you get a value, it is not a fixed value. Okay, so what we're saying now is whatever you get in the N1 value, good practice, okay, is you state the number together with the pressure at which you got the number. Okay, because that'll give you a number on a curve, and then we can use FAVAD effectively to get this relationship between N1 and pressure. Okay, so we know how it behaves. All right, Michael, last poll is this one. So if you can do the last poll.
Okay, we'll go to the last poll. Just keep an eye on the time as well, Mark.
I am. We'll go quickly.
There we go. I've got to. Here we go. So let's go. Thingy Bob.
I can explain the time wasting, Michael, because it's new technology and polls.
That's fine. We're doing the polls. Okay. So I've got to share my screen. I've got to remember what I've got to do. On there. Oh, come on, Michael. There we go. Okay, final one. So here we go into Slido. So we've got 88 and 12% on that one. You might make a comment on that a little bit later, well, when we get to Q&A. Okay, so if you assume an N1 value of, for example, 1.2, and the actual N1 test value is less than 1, Are you likely to be over-reporting or under-reporting leakage? This is a good one, Mark. Over or under-reporting leakage. So go to Slido here. So you've assumed your N1 value is 1.2, but the actual N1 test value is less than 1. Have you been likely to be over-reporting or under-reporting leakage?
We had to put one question that made you think.
Okay. Results are coming in. We're not going to show the results yet. We're going to see what happens. And then we'll start showing the results. So we've had 6 respondents yet. 8. This is the trickiest one of the lot, I think, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, 17 respondents. Let's see what the results are so far. 20. You've got a 65 to a 35 at the moment, Mark, on over-reporting.
Just so you know, I'm not planning on giving you. I'm not planning on giving you any answers to this until discussions later. So I'm just we're just watching this with a bit of intrigue.
Okay, we've had 25 respondents with 64% saying over, 36 saying under. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to the presentation, Mark. So
cool. Go back and
I'll make you host again.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Have you got your share screen? There you go.
Yeah, you're back. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's just some fun and games. So we're now getting into the crux of key things. Is why do we pay so much attention to this number? Because the first thing is we get way more improved calculations. So depending on the change in pressure, the calculation of leakage using a variable one could be quite different. Okay. So we get a far better understanding on how to calculate. And what's really cool is what people don't understand is we can actually unlock a whole lot of further relationships using this number. So we're not only looking at the N1 and pressure, we're looking at pressure and leak flow rate, we're looking at separating leakage and consumption in real time. We get zone-specific kind of factors, night day or hour day factors, and we can even use it to assess what is being used for, or to kind of validate or sense check, assess normal night use factors. So we can go down to that level of detail using the same test. So just a few things here. If your factor's out of bounds, sorry for my animation here, your N1 factor can't be less than 0.5 or greater than 1.5. Okay. So if it is, okay, we've got a couple of things it could be. This has not come out completely wrong. Anyway, yeah, so what happened there? But if it goes outside the bounds, okay, it could be breached, okay, which is why you could get a nonsensical number. It could also be because consumption is still happening. So we've got this bias over here with our night use, or your assessed normal night use factors may be too high. And we're finding this more and more to be the case. So we're doing kind of the analysis for getting the N1 relationship. We're often finding that we're getting nonsensical numbers, and it's driven normally by this assessed night use. So we're finding the allowances for kind of night use consumption is normally too high. I think a lot of the water companies have got it, kind of traditional factors they've used. We're getting better and better now with smart metering, so we understand. But just to be aware, we have found that if you're doing this, kind of in Europe or the UK, that your factors will be too high, and that's what would throw your N1 number out. So you might want to have a relook at that. We also done some advances in your unavoidable leakage. So getting down to your lowest possible leakage, or the whole question of how low can you go. you take your leakage as a big blob over here, okay? You have reported and unreported. We would have our unavoidable annual real losses. We have background leakage sitting in the bottom there. But we now also start looking at, well, how low can you go? We can actually go a little bit lower, really, under certain conditions. So WLRNA have come up with a really nifty kind of tool or aid. It's called a system correction factor, and that'll customize your unavoidable. So how low can you go for your zones? Kind of looking under certain conditions. So it can handle any number of connections. There's no real practical restrictions on pressure. Okay, we've got our standard allowances of N1s for fixed and variable area leakage. We can get that to set more accurate targets. So rather than heading for what we thought was the minimum, we can normally squeeze a little bit more out of some of the DMAs. We look at the effects of reduction of pressure on unavoidable, and it's a really, really good tool for kind of getting the number and using that for prioritizing intervention, and either pressure management or leak detection. So if you need more information on that one, I'm sure this will be put up somewhere. But WLRNA's webpage, there's a lot of information on it there. And then Kate Stanton Davies, the MD of the company, there's an email address there. So if you want to find out more about SCF, which I suggest you do, you pop on the webpage or kind of give Kate a shout. So how powerful is this thing? We're getting towards the end now, Michael. So first thing, M1 factor, continuously maps the split in consumption and leakage. Yeah. It can be used to do sense check or fact checks, made in component-based analysis. It contributes towards calculating the maximum recoverable leakage, again, split into fixed and variable. It can give you a scope of how much leakage reduction can be achieved through each of them. So through pressure management or ALC, it can help with validating your night use factors. It can help explain why you're not getting the targets that you want. And we can then, using all of those, kind of do a resource management can come out of it, because what we can do then is send the right people to the right place at the right time to do the right thing in the right order. So there's your 4 R's. But that's really what we're after. We're after efficiency, and so to get right, let's just send the teams to do what they need to do to get the result. And all of these things here are just coming from one little number that we've got from the test. So last one, 2 slides here, or a couple of slides to throw up. There are some practitioner tools that you can use to pull this all together. There's one that has been developed by the company I was working with, called Balance. It's a decision support system, and that takes everything you've seen in the previous slides and basically puts it on the platform, and allows you to make to see what's happening and to make predictions. So what does this platform do? There's a DMA, flow meter, and 2 pressure points. Okay, so we only need the 3 pressure points. We need the 1 off-peak test on a Sunday morning. And what we get out of that, comprehensive analysis, we get validation of the leakage volume, we get the nature of leakage, we get the minimum levels of leakage, and it can recommend the best intervention to meet a target. We have got a little algorithm that runs that can give a pretty decent calculation of customer side leakage, very easily calculate unmetered consumption. We can verify night use factors, and again, figure out why you might be getting the results that you want. So here's a couple of screenshots. Here's the N1 test, how we identify the window and the time. So we look at kind of this is automated. This is the history of what's going on, and we auto select a time, do the test. The test will give us, for example, here's the N1 numbers popped out for this test. You've got your profiles for the DMA split into the different types, consumption, leakage, etc. Your type of leakage. There's all your splits over there, RLA factor. So that all pops out. Here's all the system correction factor information that we need. So this is kind of looking at a standard UARL. And then I'm not going to get into too much details, but we can do the SCF increasingly taking more parameters into account. So here you got ILRs coming up here. You've got condition index popping up here. This is your current leakage, unavoidable, etc. So that's all pops up there. And then what's really cool is the unique curve for leakage inside the DMA is built. Going back to earlier on. So this is kind of generated for a DMA, and then all you need to do is kind of slide your kind of mouse along this curve, and then you'll see over here what's constantly changing, what your new leakage levels will be, the percentage reduction, how much you need to drop the pressure by. And then we've also included as an indicative measure, based on the fixed area leakage, we have this thing called an equivalent service pipe burst. So there's a little formula for kind of the kind of a leakage rate for a leak per meter of pressure. So this is just an indicative number of how many equivalent service pipe bursts you need to look for in a DMA. So quite a nifty tool. You can drag it up and down and see what you're happy with. It then comes out and gets put into a prioritized table. You can choose whatever you want, pressure management, leak detection, total, click on it, sort will give you your priority for intervention. And then just to show you, I think this is the last slide, is we've trialed this across the UK. Quite a few, I've just chosen just 18 DMAs. And we've looked at, kind of what was the baseline leakage and what could we take it down to, the kind of the old URL and with the correction factor. And then in these 18 DMAs, 130 cubes per hour leakage. Basically, with the tool I showed you predicted that we could get it down to 33 doing different bits and pieces. Achieved 24, so you took a massive whack off the baseline leakage. Some of these down here, and then the graph will be a lot, might not be too clear, but some of these were done on already optimized systems. So the tool works pretty well once you've mapped everything out together. So conclusion. We've covered some aspects of DMAs, different methods to make sure they're discrete. We've taken one of the methods further. We've looked a little bit at leakage behavior and pressure leakage. We found out how awesome this number actually is. It's a very underutilized number. We've had some practical tools, and then hopefully you've learned something along the way. So that's the end. And then Michael, I think we'll be back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. So, yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation and letting us know that N1 is awesome. We've got a few questions for you, Mark. So a couple of people have asked if they could have copies of the presentations. So if they email you, I'm not sure you actually put your email on the system, but if they email you, I'm sure they can get copies of that. That's no problem, an electronic version of it. Also to say that we're going to be putting it onto YouTube as well on that. Okay, so we've got a few questions. So Nick, if you're on it, feel free to unmute yourself. But he wants to kind of say, are you talking about zero pressure tests? And are they different to a conventional pressure zero test?
Okay, we'll have to maybe clarify. So there's a couple. So
if Nick's on, if he's still around, Nick, feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, so maybe the confusion, it is often confused. A zero pressure test takes place at a DMA level. Okay.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you get you want to isolate certain sections of pipe. And it's another type of zero pressure test, but that would be a test for leakage detection. And that's isolating bits of the network inside a DMA. The zero pressure test that we discussed today is for a DMA itself. But I know sometimes there is some confusion between the two.
Okay. Alan Wyatt asked, given the dependence of N1 on pressure, should a fixed N1 of 1.5 still be used in estimating background leakage?
Oh, there we go. Here's a good question. Yes.
Why?
Here's my answer. I would defer. I think Alan Lambert's on the call, and I think he's one of he is the grandfather of everything that we do. So respectfully, Alan, if you don't mind, would you be able to answer? Because I think we could all learn from your wisdom in this one.
You'll have to unmute, Alan.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Alan.
Okay. What happens is that as the pressure drops, it holds very close and just under 1.5 when you calculate that curve. It holds right at the top until you get down to pressures of about 15 meters. And at that part, it turns down very, very fast indeed and plunges down. So for example, when Mark did tests in somewhere with 8 meters pressure, we predicted that we wouldn't get 1.5. It was all plastic pipe, so it should all be background leakage from 1.4. Oh, sorry, it should all be 1.5. And we predicted it should be just below 1. And it came out at 0.8. And if you ask Roland, that great man, if he was still here about the N1s that he got when he did tests at very low pressures, he was coming up with N1s of 0.8 and 0.9 and things like that. Again, in all plastic pipe systems. So I would say it holds pretty close to 1.5 if it's 100% sort of flexible pipes and background leakage, provided that you're above 15 meters. But if you see all the curves, all the N1 curves, and you plot them all, you can pick out very closely that kind of data because you have a whole family of N1 curves.
Can I just clarify? What you're saying, it sounds like, is that the exponent for background leakage should be based on the pipe material, not just a fixed 1.5, unless your pressure is really low. Is that what you're saying?
Are you asking me, Alan, or asking
Yes.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm asking you, Alan to Alan.
Yeah, okay. So what was the question again? Sorry.
Well, I was putting, I hoped to put your words into slightly different terms so
Okay.
that I understood.
Yeah.
Should the N1 for estimating background leakage be based more on the pipe material than just a fixed 1.5?
The M1 for background leakage doesn't, the information I haven't seen anything which suggests that it varies very much with pipe materials, because background leakage is usually at joints and fittings. So it depends much more on the type of joints and fittings that you have, rather than the actual pipe materials themselves, whether they're rigid pipes or flexible pipes.
But should it change with average pressure? In other words, is using the 1.5 still a good thing in all cases? That's what I'm trying to get at.
It's a good, should we say, first estimate for most ranges, but you have to be careful with it when it comes down to very, very low pressures. So, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
But otherwise, I've used it all the time for 20 odd years, and it's never let me down so far in terms of the forecast. And the ULL with SCF forecasts, as Mark showed you, were all based on using the M1 1.5 for background leakage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Are there any more questions? If they are, please hit them in the chat. While we do that, I want to know, Mark, what were your answers then on the quiz? You asked the questions. What would your answers have been, Mr. Shepherd?
Okay, so the first one was preferred method of doing zone discreteness. So I put them in order. So, but I would probably go for the third one, the partial test. It's the least disruptive. But if you combine that with an N1 test, which is why I go for the partial one, is the N1 test would pick up a breach anyway. So I would go for the partial. The second question was, that was the yes/no one, wasn't it?
So the second question was
can it pick up
about
a breach?
Yes.
Yeah, can it pick up breach? Yes, it can. And then the last one is it would over-report.
Okay, it would over-report. Brilliant. Well done, all those that got the correct answers. on that one, and you kept us on our toes, Mr. Shepherd.
Yeah.
Okay. If people want to contact you, Mark, what's your email address? Are you happy to share that?
Yeah, I think. Well, how do you want to do this, Michael? Do you want to?
You can put it in the chat, or you could let us know it, or just for those that want to contact you.
Let me just put it in the chat. To everyone.
There we go, on there. But I think it's worth saying a real big thank you, Mark, for your time. It's been a very engaging time. Lots of things that we've learned from then. And probably one final question. I'm trying to get you to do two things at once here. So thank you for putting that in the chat. Apart from the UK, where else have you used this, Mark? What other countries, what other places have you used this? And why doesn't it get used more frequently? Because you mentioned right at the end that N1 doesn't get used enough. It's an underutilized tool. Where have you used it, and why should we use it more?
Okay, so the first, it was pretty much tested in Cape Town. So if some of you remember, a few years back, Cape Town was kind of going to be this first city in the world that would run out of water. So really, we tested a lot of that, the kind of foundations of what is shown in the dashboard in Cape Town. So Cape Town had, when we got involved, there about 39 days of water left. Massive issues. They tried everything else. So the last kind of ditch attempt was to say, right, we need to just drive the leakage down as much as we can. So we were appointed to go and assist them to make that happen. We had a 6-month appointment. We were almost fired after 2 weeks because for 2 weeks we did absolutely nothing. All we did was gather measurements, and then once we got the measurements and we analyzed them correctly, like what we showed you here now, we were able to predict a lot more accurately, and then we just went hell for leather. In Cape Town, we dropped the leakage by, I think it was 52 MLD in 6 weeks once we got going. So and so the trick was we knew exactly what to do where, and to what extent. So I mean the kind of the turnaround times, once this N1 number really it just tells you the big thing. It tells you what to do where. Rather than wasting your time in other zones where you wouldn't do it. So that was this kind of birth, and we've used it. As Alan mentioned, we had difficult ones like Suriname under extremely low pressures. It's been used quite a few places. In Africa, we've used it in the Far East, or maybe places like Brunei. We've used it in the Middle East. So it's. I mean, hydraulics is hydraulics. It doesn't change around the world, so everything holds true. And it just tells this. I don't think people really grasp the power of this tiny little exponent, this little number. It's a fantastic number, and like I said, it gives you a lot more than just the pressure leakage relationship. You can pick up operational anomalies. You can look at refining your night flow analysis, your component based better. But this whole thing of splitting out leakage into fixed and variable and looking how it behaves and changes over pressure. That's its biggest plus. Why the industry is not using it, I don't know. They should be. They should be on one hand revisiting the old, okay, and maximizing, and on the other hand using the new with things like system correction factors. So there's old and new things in play, which we either aren't aware of, or we don't fully understand, or we haven't used to the full potential. So there's a lot there, and this is not difficult. This really isn't rocket science if you think about it. This is math. So I'm surprised. People should be picking this up. It's a very quick, very efficient, highly accurate way of mapping out and predicting leakage reduction.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Mark, for your time today. And we've got another IWA webinar next week, next Wednesday. We've got a double one in the morning, one in the afternoon. It's the same presentation, but it's live with Tim Farwell about how climate change is affecting leakage burst rates and what we can do about it. You'll see that on LinkedIn and in the weekly emailer. So thanks a lot, and everyone have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.